Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Hindle, Commercial Director at Amazon Growth Agency Fluid Marketplaces. I'd like to welcome you all to the Fluid Marketplaces and Simply VAT webinar on Amazon expansion for overseas, setting the foundations. In this webinar, you will hear from Amazon growth expert Léonie Ford-Miah and VAT specialist Liam Payne about the things your brand needs to have in place before you can start selling overseas to ensure the expansion is successful. Lainey has held senior advertising roles at Amazon and also launched Amazon Music and Amazon Student Prime. At Fluid Marketplaces, she works with our team to help brands to set up and grow overseas. Liam and his team at Simply VAT advise brands on VAT requirements when expanding globally. In this webinar, Liam will focus on VAT in the EU and UK. The webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. We will spend the last 10 minutes answering your questions, so please add any questions into the Q&A box. I'll also send a follow-up email after the webinar with contact details for Lainey and Liam if you prefer to ask a question after the event. I'm now going to hand over to Lainey for her presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Hope everyone can see me out there. I hear that we have people from far and wide across the pond, so thank you for joining us. So essentially, Fluid Marketplaces act as a concierge. We assist with any type of brand across every category, and we enable brands to launch either for the first time or expand overseas. So for the past 18 months, we've seen a real increase in the number of clients wanting to join from Canada, the USA, Mexico, and launch over here. In fact, yesterday we were contacted by somebody from Brazil. So it literally is far and wide across the globe. Most circumstances, we assist only with the front end Amazon piece. So we have an 8-point plan, and I'll take you through that now. So it gives you kind of points of reference, food for thought, and ensure that you're ready to come to us should you want to launch across the pond. So the first point is Seller Central registration. Should be incredibly easy. Many of you have probably done it already. You might already have a store. But I would say that make sure you prepare your documents, including not just your ID, but the ID, for example, the utility bill that you're going to use to represent yourself when you launch into Amazon, because time and time again, we see Amazon rejecting certain documentation when certain details are not laid out in exactly the same way. For example, an address might have a comma after a number or after a town, or you've written your county or state and you haven't got exactly the same laydown on the utility bill that you've used. It might be accepted at the beginning, and then a couple of months down the line, you might try to input a credit card to pay for advertising, and that detail is different. And we had a case recently with a client who are globally known, they're huge, and they were suspended for 2 months just because the addresses didn't match. And they had £2 million worth of stock in a warehouse sitting there, unable to sell it on Amazon. So we managed to unlock it as Fluid with our expertise and our escalation points within Amazon. So it was solved, but it took time. So we want to avoid that at all cost. If you need help, we can assist you over the phone and do it with you, and we can just review your documentation just to save any aggravation down the line. The second point is brand registry. So some of you may already own the brand register on Amazon. It's a separate platform to Seller Central and Vendor Central, so separate login details. It enables you to take ownership of your brand. And in order to do that, you need to prove through trademarking in each country that you're going to be trading in. You don't have to have finished and completed the trademark in order to apply for brand registry. It can be pending, but we can help you facilitate that either by pointing you to the government agency who you can work with directly at relatively low cost, or there are agencies out there who can do it all for you, and we can point you in the right direction. Equally then, if they're going forward, once you're launched, if you need help navigating brand registry and what that means to be an owner, we can help you. Many brands give us access directly into their system. So kind of we work as an extension of your team. The third point is category approval. So category approval is the initial unlocking of the gate that enables you to sell on Amazon in whichever market you're going after. You'll have to do it in each one. So if we're going into Europe, we'll unlock in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, etc. in order. Not only do we need just rudimentary photographs of the product, but we need to be able to see really clear contact details of the manufacturer, who the responsible person is for any contact in market, should a product need to be sent back, etc. These are all kind of subject to category and country. There's kind of different rules, and our team can help you with that. But more so, if we're going into Europe, products need ingredients or instructions in local language on product. They can either be kind of inherently printed on product, or they can be stickered on, but we can advise on best practice for you with that. But again, I don't know if there's any scouts out there, but it's best to be prepared. We want to have everything in, kind of all your ducks in a row, ready for you to start your application. The fourth point is if you are transferring, if you're an existing seller and you're transferring over to the UK, for example, from the US or into the EU, then you might think it's really easy. We can just use the Build International Listings tool. You click a switch and you can start selling in Europe. It is relatively straightforward, but one can't assume, for example, that we have an example recently that a dental care client of ours, Dental Herb, they're quite big in the US, came over to the UK. They have certain marketing claims that are not compliant with our marketing standards in the UK. So it's not just the language we need to be mindful of, it's actually what is compliant and what's allowed in each market. So it's very pertinent for supplements, medical health. Claiming something that solves a certain ailment may or may not be allowed in certain markets. Choosing the right products for your country that you're going into. So we advise, obviously we do due diligence, and we can do this with you or for you. Researching search trends, researching competitors in markets, understanding the potential size of the market, and writing a forecast accordingly. Some clients have done that already before they come to us, and they want to go kind of all out and go into all markets, and are happy to trade with the basic listings, their 5 bullet points and their titles and images in English. That's acceptable, and it's a way to market, and it's essentially a speedy way. Some clients prefer to go big, prepare all their content, and we advise either to go to a professional translation house, depending on the product, or there's some really good AI tools, as long as we can facilitate getting the language verified by local professionals. I think where we've seen kind of good progress in moving, we've got a couple of interesting examples at the moment. We have a hair care client in the US who we've helped them, and we've assisted on the setup, but they want to just understand the A to Z. They think they've got all their ducks in a row. Their listings are great. They don't want to spend on advertising right now. They just want to understand the baseline for 3 months to understand what the organic ranking is. And then they'll get a view on how much they need to spend on ads going forward. The fifth point is the shipment guidance. So we advise, if possible, where we can, to make sure that all brands are with the Prime badge, which means FBA, if possible, or fulfilled seller fulfilled Prime if you've got logistics partner set up accordingly. We can help you with the shipping guidance, understanding what's the best for you in terms of not just from a customer perspective, because that could depend on the actual product. Some products are expected the next day. There is a movement in Europe now that there's an accepted trend for slower goods to be moved. Not everything has to be delivered tomorrow. And, with the eco credentials that go with that, it's not, speed is not always of the essence, but generally with Amazon, it is expected for a next day delivery. So we can help you understand best working practices with that. And obviously with Liam's team, there's VAT consequences for where you might want to be moving stock to, which could affect your decisions on which shipment plan you're going to go with. All of this said, I think probably the most amount of time that our teams spend is working with your teams to troubleshoot. Every day, Amazon throw up different, not always problems, but new scenarios that we're not always familiar with. More, I'd say 95% of the time, our team have already dealt with them. So we're good to help you in that guidance. But we act as an extension of your team, taking that responsibility away. We're very, very tenacious, and we'll kind of hope to get things sorted quickly. If we can't, as a preferred partner of Amazon's, we have direct access into retail help and advertising help should we need an escalation point. Payments, people often ask about, do we need a bank account in local market? One doesn't. You can use your domestic bank account. There is an Amazon currency converter, which you can just register your local bank account. So that's quite easy. But we do have some clients who open whole new business entities in other markets to facilitate. So, we can have conversations about that, and we can point you into the right direction of those that kind of know best. We're not financial advisors. The eighth point I would say is there are some nuances in markets in terms of business admin. So, for example, if one is hoping to trade in Germany, you will need a Lucid number, and that's only in Germany. And the Lucid number looks at your sustainability credentials. So you may or may not know that a general person in Germany, their domestic waste is measured in weight. And that's exactly the same for you. Amazon or the German authorities will be measuring your sustainability input as your products come into the thing, and they'll be looking at the packaging as well as the product. So you have to have registered for a Lucid number. As I said, that's only Germany. And then you also need an EORI number, which is the Economic Operators Registers and Identification Number, which Liam will come on to later. But the most important point for today is VAT and all of the questions that come around it, because I don't know about you, but every month there seems to be something new. And Liam is always the first person that we talk to, which is why we thought he would be the best person to bring on a webinar and collaborate with today. So I'm going to hand over to Liam and think about any questions, and we'll be able to run a Q&A at the end of anything that I've said. Thank you. Over to you, Liam.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to very quickly share my screen because, as already kind of noted, it is a little bit complex when it comes to VAT. So we've got a bit of slides going on just to help us run through everything. Just going to try this. Perfect. So hopefully that should be on screen. So yeah, just to give a brief overview for those who are not familiar with us or have never seen me before. So my name's Liam. I'm the Partnerships and Senior Business Development Manager here at SimplyVat. So constantly having day-to-day conversations with clients who are looking to scale into these new markets. And in general, SimplyVat kind of help you, as Leonie's kind of gone through already. We get VAT registrations, we support with EORI numbers, and we help you keep that compliance and kind of take away the VAT burden of the expansion, because we know that it's not everyone's favorite topic to kind of go through. So we remove all those kind of burdens and kind of support you with scaling as you kind of grow into these new areas. With the kind of VAT side of things, we're going to firstly look at the UK and then kind of grow into the EU side of things. So when you're a non-UK business, the first thing to note is that you have no thresholds before you require VAT registration. Due to that, you are required to then obtain that VAT number. I know Amazon in particular, they're very strict. They won't allow you to kind of really move your goods into an FBA warehouse until you've obtained that VAT number. So, but the main triggers really just outside of that are if you're dispatching goods from a UK fulfillment center in general, or if you're selling on your own website and there's a value below £135. Essentially, there's a rule at the border of the UK where if a product is below £135, you would need to kind of cover that VAT on behalf. We'll go through very shortly how Amazon actually kind of counteracts that. But if you're doing it on your own website, then you need to be VAT registered anyway. And also, if you're selling anything above that value, or you've got a mobile phone that's maybe £400 and you want to be the importer of record, because obviously, as you can imagine, the VAT on that supply is probably going to be a little bit more. So your end customer may not want to cover that at border. You'd also trigger that need for the VAT number. With the importation into the UK, as previously highlighted, the EORI number is required. So EORIs, they'll be needed for both importation into the UK and the EU. Due to Brexit, you will need two EORI numbers now. So if you're a UK brand and you already hold a UK EORI number, it will not clear into the EU unless you have a XI validation, which is essentially for kind of trade into Northern Ireland. But outside of that, you would just need a standard EU EORI number. Or if you're a US brand who is scaling into both markets, then you would need both of those numbers. And essentially, they are VAT aligned. So it allows you to cover or reclaim any import VAT that you settle at the border. Or you can use postponed VAT accounting in the UK, which is quite a preferable choice for a lot of clients who are beginning to scale. Essentially, it just pushes the import VAT onto your VAT return, so you don't have to cover that. And it just allows you to have a bit of a better cash flow as you begin that initial expansion. And essentially, with that, it just allows also a record of the imports and it will feed into what each country has it slightly different. But in the UK, it's essentially a customs portal, and you'd need your C79 documents, which you can then use to file on that VAT return as well. But outside of larger shipments, they can just be used on singular goods that are coming in from different channels rather than just Amazon as well. The most important piece is obviously what we're focused on today, and that's looking at how the rules are in particular for marketplaces. So if you're fulfilling inside the UK and you're, say, a non-UK brand, you would need to charge VAT on your products on Amazon, but Amazon is collecting and remitting that VAT on that transaction and remitting it to HMRC. Essentially, Amazon acts as a deemed supplier. So as a deemed supplier, they take care of everything on your behalf. However, because I know probably a lot of you are thinking, so why do I need a VAT number if they're doing that for me? It's because you still require to hold one because you're owning goods in the UK, warehousing goods in the UK, and also the VAT returns that you would file would essentially just have an outline of every single sale made within that quarterly period. Instead of having that VAT to be remitted, it's zeroed out, but it still is required to kind of note the transactions. And I think in some back way, it links to kind of Amazon's records also. Alternatively, if the goods are obviously fulfilled from outside of the UK, so you're using one of Amazon's remote fulfillment plans, it's going to determine on the consignment value of the goods. So if it's less than £135, Amazon will basically collect the VAT and pay it to the tax office. So they would do it on your behalf instead of you requiring to do that. As long as it's obviously done through an Amazon or a marketplace channel, most marketplaces do follow suit with Amazon, I would say. But obviously just check the particular rules with that marketplace. If it's greater than £135, you need to decide really who that importer on record will be when the goods clear border. Amazon typically does prefer that yourself as the seller obtain the VAT registration when to kind of collect or remit that VAT in this instance. They don't typically like to collect or remit anything above £135. So in that regard, you would maybe need a VAT number. The only thing to note on that is, and if anyone's obviously interested, we can kind of discuss this further later, but it can be a little bit tricky to get a VAT number if it is above £135, just because it's not a VAT trigger. So we'd need to kind of provide a bit more evidence to support why you need that VAT number. And I think the next, yeah. So as you can see, the registration process in the UK takes up to 12 weeks. So going back to that piece on kind of evidence, that's why it's really, really key and prominent to obtain as much evidence as to why you need the VAT number as possible when we process it through with HMRC, which is the UK tax offices. Because essentially they will need kind of fulfillment contracts, screenshots of any storefronts you're operating in. If you've made any previous sales to the UK, they may need to see proof of this because you may need to, backdate your registration depending on the route of supply in previous kind of states. But for example, if you're kind of just doing Etsy, eBay sales, they typically act as the importer of record. So Amazon, they won't require you to go backwards for those ones because you technically have never had any direct activity yourselves. With that, so looking more so now at the EU, there's a few things to know. Obviously, as you're scaling, no matter what kind of sales channel you're utilizing, whether it's a marketplace, your own website, or both, you just need to look at what is the precise nature of the transaction. Are you selling goods or services, or is it a bundled supply? I know they're becoming more and more common. And whether your client is business to business or B2C, through Amazon, I know they obviously now have a vendor program as well. So are you routing through the vendor? Are you going just direct to consumer seller central? And where are the goods going from and to? Are you warehousing? Are you not warehousing in the EU? Where are those goods? Where's that end location? Where's the start location? And that leads on to the next point of who is accounting for that VAT. Is it your customer, yourself, or the marketplace that you're selling on? And once you have, I guess, all those key answers, you can kind of guide a bit more as to, or at least it helps us support you in determining where your VAT registrations may be triggered moving forward. With the importation, obviously, as we mentioned in previous kind of discussion with the UK side, obviously since Brexit, there's now a hard border between the UK and EU. So if you're scaling into both markets and you import the goods into the UK first, you would then have to, if you're importing them back out into the EU, you would need to pay another round of import VAT and duties because of the new hard border in place. So that means that essentially all imported goods are subject to the re-importation procedures. And once the goods are cleared, they are then free for circulation around the EU and can be moved into multiple markets if needed. Maybe more so that's prominent for the Pan-European program, which I'm just about to go into in a moment, so we can kind of go back to this as well. But essentially, once they're in, they're in. You don't need to re-go through any other duties or VAT at any of the member state borders because they've already been cleared for European distribution. And it's always key that it's the importer of record that's liable for customs clearance. So typically, if you are VAT registered, you're the owner of the goods and, you're moving goods into Amazon, you will be acting as your own importer of record. But there is other opportunities available for you for that as well. But that's whoever's the importer of record, they will be the ones liable. The fulfillment options. So you've got a few different fulfillment options, especially with Amazon. Obviously, the first one that you could look at, which I would say I find more common when discussing with clients who have multi-channel supplies rather than kind of a single marketplace route, is the merchant fulfillment network. That's when you're essentially using a 3PL or you have your own warehouse and you're fulfilling the orders from there. So that could be own website sales, marketplace sales, Amazon, whatever kind of channel you're looking at. And you can then choose that fulfillment location. So on the VAT side of things, That would typically be if you're warehousing, say, in Germany, you would need a German VAT number for that. Amazon will take care of any VAT on any distance sales. And then for your own website, you may utilize something called a Union One-Stop Shop registration to account for those direct-to-consumer supplies. But that, again, as mentioned, is mainly more common with multi-channel clients. And then the actual like FBA models, you obviously have single market models. So you could obviously just do Amazon FBA in Germany, or you can utilize the European Fulfillment Network. So that is essentially where you select a country to dispatch your goods from, and all sales are made as distance sales from that country to customers. So you could choose Germany as a location. That tends to be the most common one, or France, for example, and hold all your goods there. Amazon will then distribute them out direct to consumer, but you don't need to worry necessarily about your goods being kind of warehoused in other countries where you're not registered because you're not selected into the Pan-EU fulfillment program, which is where you've got the multiple countries. So there's a few more on this list, and actually the UK is one of them. But the main countries that we tend to see people grow into and scale into first are Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. But you can select of any of those 10, or I believe 11 now countries, because Ireland was launched last year, if I remember correctly. So there was like a new one added to the market. And it's also becoming quite a popular option. So we may actually see the top four get a bit switched out over the coming year. With the marketplace VAT rules, it's essentially pretty similar to the UK, but it's slightly different. So with marketplace in the EU, they take on all responsibility for collection and remittance of non-EU based companies selling on Amazon in particular. So for those cases, it will be they'll take liability for any goods dispatched within the EU or goods dispatched from outside the EU with a consignment value of below 150 euros. You, however, would be responsible for any VAT when the sales is made to a VAT registered business in the EU, so they won't typically take any liability for that, or goods is dispatched from outside of, that should say the EU, apologies for my spelling, with a consignment value of above 150 euros, or if you are an EU-based seller, Amazon will not take care of any VAT for you. However, as mentioned previously with all of these kind of comments, it does not mean that you do not have an obligation to become VAT registered, because the trigger for that is you holding your stock in the EU. So because of these things, even if, for example, you're on the Pan-European program and you've got 3 countries that you're warehousing your goods in, and you're a US-based business, even though your goods are held inside the EU, Amazon's collecting that VAT on your behalf, you still have that obligation to become VAT registered and file the returns in the exact same way as the UK with like the 0 item, line items on there, because you are the owner of those goods inside the EU. And just 2 little quick case studies, and then I will stop going on. But the first one we're going to go through is just looking at a UK seller. So US business, having Amazon FBA, and they also sell on their own website, but it's into the UK. So looking at that, they'd need to import goods into the UK and fulfill from the UK, and that will require a UK VAT registration. Charge the VAT on the product price. Amazon will keep and remit the VAT to HMRC on all the Amazon sales. However, you would be responsible for collection of VAT on your own website sales and declare that to HMRC. However, it can go on the same VAT return, so there's no requirement for 2 separate VAT returns. You just collate all the data and file it under one singular return on a quarterly basis. And then on the flip of this, let's just say we've got a Canadian business using FBA in Germany, but they also have a mixed supply of Amazon and own website. So firstly, the importation would require a German VAT registration. You will also require an EORI number. Germany at the moment are not allowing any non-German businesses to obtain an EORI number in Germany. So instead, we're kind of going about that by getting one in another country and linking that across, but it works the same way. So you'd need those 2 first. And then because you're also selling on your own website, a one-stop shop registration would be triggered. charge VAT on your product prices. Amazon would keep the VAT and remit that on tax offices for all sales on Amazon. And again, you would be responsible for the ones on your own website. And hopefully that makes sense. But you will get the slides very shortly if that did sound a bit like gibberish.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks, Lainey. Really informative talks. I've had a audience question through. So the question is it possible to do pan-European distribution, choosing, say, Germany as a hub to store your goods for alcoholic products? The duty, etc., for wines is not straightforward.
Do you want to start on this one?
Well, for pan-European, my understanding is that you need to be registered in 2 markets. Is that right, Liam?
Yeah, that is correct. So, in order to enter into the Pan-European program, you would need to have a couple of markets set up. But with the duties, I wouldn't say that piece is really relevant just because it depends on the actual origin of the kind of alcohol products, let's say. But there's no duties when the goods are moved around the EU. It's more getting them inside the EU that you may face the issues.
Yeah, there's alcohol. I've worked on alcohol quite a lot and it on Amazon, and it can be quite tricky just from an Amazon's own, I want to say ethical, but it's not really their own kind of decision making around their own attitude to alcohol. Some years they're all about it and it's their fastest growing category and they're giving it a big push. And then other years they're like, no, we don't sell alcohol, we don't take alcoholic advertising, da da da. So they can be quite dynamic. So I think if you've got a window of opportunity, you take it, but just be mindful that they can be a little bit schizophrenic in their approach to alcohol, is my experience in the past, say, 15 years.
Lainey, what are the biggest mistakes sellers make when expanding overseas for the first time?
Gosh. So I think back to my point earlier about being prepared. There is often a bit of an assumption that if you're selling in one market like the US or you're just operating in the UK, then it is easy. The function is you literally can click a button and then the markets open up. But you still have to do the due diligence of understanding your catalogue, doing your research in terms of what competitors might be in each individual locale on the EU. The EU isn't just one big mush of the same people. The markets operate differently, and that is not only kind of country specific, but audience specific and by category. So I think it's lack of preparation and also putting people, having the resource internally to manage all of these different stages that we need to go through. And then once you're launched, if you're on Seller Central, having the customer service in place and not assuming that everybody speaks English. You need customer service in local language. So there might be a third party agency that you need for that, or are you going to manage it in-house? So there's a lot. I think it's the thought process and the planning before one starts is where I think people come a cropper. The second thing is that assumption that even if you have got all your ducks in a row from a logistics perspective and you can get product from your warehouse, wherever it may be, to customers in whichever country, one shouldn't assume that you're essentially building a store and everybody will know to come to it. You just because you're doing well in the UK doesn't mean everyone knows who you are in France. You need advertising budgets. So it doesn't just come down to the planning. It comes down to it's a pay to play. You have to pay for the traffic.
We've had another question come through. So aside from LUCID for Germany, what other EPR requirements are there for selling within the main EU markets?
That's a really good question. I don't know of any others actually that are specific to market. That doesn't mean there aren't any, it just means I haven't come across any yet.
I think there's a couple. So EPR is actually something we're looking to grow into and scale into ourselves this year. So from the top of my head, I'm pretty sure batteries is a key category as well within Germany, as well as obviously packaging recycling, because they're very big, as you've highlighted yourself, regarding kind of the recycling requirements. But if I remember off the top of my head, it is batteries, recycling, and there is something else, and I'm going to kick myself because it's very obvious, I think.
This came up last year. One of our clients in the US make electricity waste filters, which is incredibly unusual, and we had to really educate ourselves on what that meant. But it's essentially you plug in to your house and it cleans any unnecessary electricity on the wires. We found, as part of our concierge service, we found an agency in the Netherlands who specialize in compliance and EPR, because it was so, you really need to be kind of on top game with something like an electrical piece. And we recommend that we get experts in. They not only look at the compliance for each of the EU markets, but then they will translate and verify the copy, the instructions, to ensure that guarantees and function are perfectly understood by all markets.
Liam, I wanted to ask, what do brands need to have in place to register for VAT in the UK or EU if they're a non-resident business?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because it varies. Each client's going to be different really within their requirements. Obviously, you do have additional requirements as we've kind of just highlighted with like EPR and maybe translation of products. So that's one thing you would need to even begin kind of scaling. For the VAT side of things, there's as long as you've got your evidence of the Amazon storefront, shipments going in, any taxable activity in the past, that's typically enough to kind of build that momentum, especially if you're doing a pan EU and you're kind of because we've seen, and I don't know whether you guys have seen either, but a lot more clients recently are taking that riskier approach of just growing straight into like 4 or 5 markets, which I think is great. Definitely should be tried more and more. But because of that, if you are doing a pan EU, you need to basically click that button and show that, and that should also help get that registered.
I also
But
wanted to check. Sorry, you carry on if you
no,
still.
I was just going to say a bit, each market is so different within the EU. And as we kind of discuss more and more about each individual market, there's going to be a little bit of quirks here and there that you also need to consider.
Yeah. So when do brands need to register for VAT in the UK and EU? And what happens if a deadline's missed?
Yeah. So as soon as you can, I would say really, we find a common thing is that people are registering a bit too late or they're kind of leaving it last, which is okay in some markets. Other markets have a longer time frame. UK, for example, as we highlighted, it takes up to 12 weeks. Germany at the moment for US brands is taking 5 to 6 months. So if you're, I know we're not even in Q2 yet, but if you're looking for a Q4 launch in Germany, now's the time to be acting because of the long period. So that's one thing to kind of consider. When it comes to missing the filings and deadlines, it's going to depend on the severity, how long, like if they've acted previously, how long ago that was, how much they made, kind of depending on that. But you would likely face a penalty or, which is normally an interest amount or a singular fine for paying more. If you're very non-compliant, obviously, other risks may be associated, but it depends on each market again.
Lainey,
We,
do you
we
think it's sorry?
no, I was going to say we have had some brands that somehow have managed to trade, not for very long, but they've managed to trade without putting their VAT number in. And then they get suspended a couple of
Right.
months down the line. So people think they're going to
Yeah,
get away with it, and then they
you
always
don't.
get
You
caught.
don't. Yeah.
You know.
Do you think it's better to expand into one country first, or is it possible to launch across multiple marketplaces simultaneously?
Gosh, I don't think there's a straight answer to that. I think it depends on the appetite for the product and the awareness of the brand in market already. So I've got two examples at the moment. One, PPE, manufacturer of kind of hard hats and workwear, and they have seen demand. They're getting orders from the UK into multiple markets in the EU already. They've looked at the search terms, their brand name is sought after. So they know there's appetites. They are front loading investment. They are paying they're paying now for all their content to be translated in 8 languages, which is no small feat, and then expecting us to build all at once and being completely retail ready. Another argument is you don't need to have all your content A plus and stores ready. You can launch with basic content, the skeletal of a listing, and test in one country and make sure that your logistics, customer service, finances, everything, all your ducks are in a row, and then expand from there. So I think it just depends on the context of you as a brand and the appetite for your product in market.
And what do you think is the best approach to scaling once you find success in one international market?
So, I mean, it's easy to say that you need marketing dollars, which, you do. As I've pointed out earlier, there's some brands that like to kind of baseline organically first, but it's like building a store on Oxford Street in London or building it in a back street of Norfolk. You can't expect people to come without them seeing that you exist and that they know that you're there. And whether that's spending advertising dollars in Amazon, which you're going to need a bit of, you can start with as little as £1, or it's advertising outside and going all out on a big kind of above the line campaign, driving people to Amazon. It depends on kind of how much you're prepared and how confident you are that there's appetite for your product in market and how much you're prepared to spend.
Just a question for Liam about inventory in the EU. Is it possible to store it in the region without an active VAT number?
Yes and no. So essentially, importation, you're going to struggle to import your goods without having the EORI number or a VAT number. But the actual holding of stock isn't always the trigger. It's you cannot. So I could hold stock in a room in Spain for like 15 years and maybe not really trigger the need for that, but I could not do anything with that stock. I can't move it to another location. I can't sell it, anything without that VAT number. So the long answer is potentially. The short answer is it's not really recommended just because you may face questions, when you go to register is how did your stock get there? When did your stock get there? And then you may be enforced to backdate, but it all depends on the tax offices. I mean, Germany, for example, definitely do not do that. That is my biggest recommendation. But other markets, you may be able to kind of have a bit more leeway.
Okay, unless anybody else has got any more questions, that's all from us. I hope you found that really helpful. I will send some follow-up information afterwards, including contact details for Lainey and Liam in case you would like to make contact with them. And I hope you found it useful. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to Liam and Lainey for all their input.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.